Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that I would hope everyone understands by now, but when I see some of the questions in my comments, I've come to realize a lot of people don't understand, and it's stuff that we need to retouch upon both with observational evidence as well as clinical trials and the evidence out there. And this whole idea that there's a hypertrophy rep range has been largely debunked. Again, that's not my opinion. That is the scientific consensus at this point. This idea that like the 8 to 12 rep range is the hypertrophy rep range is fairly silly. Now, we could argue that that sort of rep range will probably be able to get us to very high levels of hypertrophy with a low number of sets. Okay, we could argue from an efficiency perspective, in some cases it's actually pretty good. And in fact, I do a very, very large percentage of my own training in that range, even though I care about strength primarily. But why? Because size equals strength potential. But when you go look at all the data out there, like if you guys look through all the studies that Schoenfeld did on hypertrophy, and I'm not saying I necessarily like him, because I don't. I want to make that clear. I actually have personal reasons to dislike the guy, but that doesn't invalidate his data. And I think that's where we have to be fair. So we have to be fair. So we come over to the data that he's done. He's done studies on this, and what he determined was that when volume is equated, and volume being sets times reps times weight, okay? In other words, tonnage was similar. And we're getting within the same number of reps of failure. That 3 rep sets produced just as much muscle growth, like when they checked it with ultrasounds and everything else extrapolated over months, as doing 10 rep sets. Okay? Now, it took more sets, right? In other words, to reach 30,000 pounds of weight moved, in that case tonnage of quality reps, you got to do more sets of triples than you do tens. It ended up being more time spent in the gym, and it can beat your joints and stuff up a little bit more when we're talking about big multi-joint movements. Those people also gained more strength. That's just one of the studies that has been done looking at this. And what's been largely found is that the whole idea that there's a hypertrophy rep range isn't true. And in fact, a lot of people say, oh, we'll try to stick somewhere between 5 and 20. Well, that's good advice. Technically, we've had studies that found that high levels of hypertrophy have been obtained going with even higher reps than that and lower reps than that. So even that 5 to 20, while I would argue it's a very practical range, it isn't a be-all, end-all. In other words, it is possible to achieve maximal muscle growth with ranges outside of that. They're not as practical always. They're not always as practical. And here's a lot of the things I would argue. If we're really trying to get everything that we need multiple rep ranges anyway. So what does the training system that I use look like? Well, I use a conjugate method, and I use 1s, 5s, 10s, 30s. Those are kind of my bread and butter. But I mean, I do some stuff up in the 15 and 20 also for specific muscles, right? By specific muscles, I mean deltoids. Some tricep, okay? That's what I'm doing these days. We use all these different rep ranges. We could argue from an efficiency perspective that certain movements are going to do better there. And here's what I mean. Are you really going to do 10 and 12 rep sets on a back squat? Are you really going to do that? Really going to do that on a deadlift for any extended period of time? I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, you're realistically not going to do more than 5 for any period of time, unless you just are a glutton for punishment. Let's come back over to that point. 5s can produce maximal muscle growth, can it? So even for me, like my speed work with speed squats is in the 5 rep range. Speed bench 5s. do heavy singles. Well, what about other movements? I mean, realistically speaking, is it practical to do 5-rep sets? And smaller movements, single joint exercises? No. No, you're not going to do 5s on single joint exercises. Your joints are going to get beat up and get extra tendon inflammation. No, we go with higher reps. Usually it's going to be 10, 15. Okay? It's usually what we're going to see. But we see hypertrophy with even higher. Well, what about if we're going to add in some restoration work? Meaning, what if you're just going to add extra band work and other stuff? Yeah, that's where 30s start to make sense. Particularly for lagging muscles that need the extra work capacity. Because that's the other thing that we're looking at. We have to factor in these other things that we're trying to do. Because hopefully no one's goal is just to gain muscle. I mean, realistically, yes, I understand most of us are trying to do that, but we usually are trying to do other things also. Like maybe we're trying to gain strength. Maybe we're trying to gain explosive power on something. Maybe we're trying to build connective tissue up. Maybe we're trying to increase muscular endurance, work capacity. Okay, these different rep ranges become valuable tools for doing some of these things. Right? It's not just about a clear cut and dry, oh, I'm just trying to make the muscle grow. Well, you know, good luck with that, but that's not going to work for real athletes. We need to take into account what else it is we are trying to accomplish. And we can get into very complicated training. You know, like in my case, I'm a master's athlete trying to push elite numbers. I'm up in my 40s. Deadlifting past 600 pounds, trying to get to 700, trying to get my squat to 600. And I'm not far off either. Maybe try to get a 400 bench, 405 bench. All while staying, you know, under 220 pounds up in my 40s. That's sort of goals I'm looking at, in addition to being strong and conditioned and in shape. Meaning cardiovascularly, not bodybuilder. All right, so we care about these different things. Well, we have to incorporate these different elements, and we need them in different areas. Okay, we're going to have certain muscles that if they need more work capacity because they're giving out in the middle of a workout, we're going to have to do some really high rep work for them. If we're going to build tendons and things, maybe we need the really high rep band work, or maybe to build the connective tissue in the low back, we need the really high rep reverse hypers, like the sets of 30. I do 5x30 all the time on those. I do that like 3 days a week for my low back, right? With that particular device. We're going to have to do some maximum effort work so that we can push maximum weight and build the intramuscular coordination for it. Hey, we're doing other stuff here, guys. Now, does it make sense for a pretty good chunk of your volume training to be around 10? Yeah, it does. It's efficient. That's the reason people used to believe it was a hypertrophy rep range. Because usually, if we worked in that rep range, for most lifters, especially not super advanced lifters, if you just do a lot of work in that rep range, you get out of the gym faster and still seem to get really good gains. Okay? That concept came from observing anecdote, meaning 3 sets of 10 on a big movement usually stimulates sufficient muscle growth. Maybe you could throw in 3 sets of 10 on a smaller exercise to go with it, right? So maybe you're doing 3 sets of 10 on some bench, and then you do some small work for your pecs and triceps, right? Seemed to produce pretty good gains. You guys realized that a long time ago. So they just started thinking of that as the hypertrophy rep range. You get away with very few sets. But it takes a lot more time to do sets of 30 than it does to do sets of 10. Okay. It takes more time, and they create their own set of fatigue and burn. So at a certain point, people just realized that, and so it just started being called the hypertrophy rep range because it hadn't been studied in great detail, and it got put into a lot of books, a lot of personal training classes, but it hadn't been researched thoroughly in a lab to see if it was actually true. Anecdotally, it works pretty good, And there's nothing wrong with using those. They're actually quite efficient. And again, you see me doing a bunch of sets of 10 every single week. But I also do my speed work with 5s and singles. I do my max work with singles. I do my restoration work with 30s. I don't know how many reps are involved in dragging a sled for conditioning, but that builds my quads up. And a lot of other people train like that too. So it's a matter of understanding that there's no rep range that puts more muscle on you. 5s can build maximum muscle just fine. 10s can build maximum muscle just fine. So can 15s. We're also looking at what's practical to use on different movements and what else are we getting out of it. What are our other performance goals out of whatever rep range it is that we're using? They bring different things to the table in terms of performance and specifically what we might be trying to do in our overall training goals. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.